Let's dive in. First up, we're going to get our gizmo up on the screen. From there, pick the polysphere option from the gear menu. Next, we're going to press Unify. Let's get back to the gear and choose the soft deformer option this time. Once it's done, press Accept. With your Move Infinite Depth brush, let's make some adjustments. Now bring the gizmo back, and from the gear, select Remesh by ZRemesher. Slide the red cone over. This will give us symmetry in the x-axis. For the white cone, slide it to 200. Once you're happy with the results, press Accept. Time to head back to the gear and select the soft deformer again. This time, let's set the Y divides to 8 using the orange cone. Go ahead and run a polish by features after that. Delete half the model and turn on double. Now we're going to unmask the front, blur out the mask, and scale it in. Feel free to make some adjustments using the gizmo. After masking the front, run a polish by features. Go ahead and smooth out the back with a low intensity. Next, we want to scale in the front a bit more. Let's run another polish by features and smooth out the front some more. With the Move Infinite Depth brush, do some fine tuning. Now we can switch to the Move brush to make some last minute adjustments. Rotate to the top view and scale it in the Z-axis. Get the gizmo up and choose Soft Deformer from the gear menu. When you're satisfied, press Accept and run Polish by Features. Next, let's use the Move brush for some minor touch-ups. Now it's time to delete every other edge loop with the Z-Modeler brush. This will reduce our topology, making it easier to model the rest of the side fairing. Now extrude all the polygons. With the move brush, we'll move the points outward to line up with the reference. While we have a moment, let's chat about the Mask by Features tool in ZBrush. You've seen me use it a bunch of times already, but we really haven't dug into what it does. It's super useful when it comes to keeping parts of your models safe while you're sculpting, painting, or performing other operations. You'll find the Mask by Features options tucked away under the Tool palette in the Masking section. So you know how ZBrush uses the term feature? Well, it's just not referring to one thing. It can refer to a bunch of stuff like polygroups, creased edges, or even the border of your model. Now here's the cool part, it generates a mask on your model based on the feature you pick. So let's break it down. Say you've got a model with different polygroups. You can lean on the Mask by Polygroups option to whip up a mask for the polygroup border. This way you can retain the border of your polygroup. You could also invert the mask and leave the borders exposed to run a polish by feature operation. Well, what if you have creased edges on your model? No worries, it will automatically mask those areas, saving the creased edges while you're sculpting. Now let's say your mesh is open, as in it doesn't form a closed volume, which gives you what we call a border edges or an open border. The Mask by Features with borders selected lets you mask those border edges. This comes in handy when you want to adjust the overall shape of the mesh while keeping the border details intact. To get the Mask by Features to work, simply pick the features you want to mask by, could be polygroups, creased edges, or border edges, and then press the Mask by Features button. Remember, the whole point in masking is to shield parts of your model. The mask areas won't be affected by sculpting, painting, or deformations until you clear the mask. So you can see how using Mask by Features can seriously streamline your workflow by automatically masking areas based on your model's characteristics. While Mask by Features is a great tool for focusing on specific areas of your model, another handy feature that works in a similar way, but slightly different, is Frame Mesh. This tool actually visualizes the same features as Mask by Features, but instead of creating a mask, it frames them with curves. What it does is it creates curves along the features of your mesh that can be used as guides for tubes, wires, and all sorts of other details that can add a lot to the hard surface model. It essentially frames these features like the borders of the polygroup, creases, or even the open borders of the mesh. Let's say you're working on a mechanical part that needs wiring or cables. You can use Frame Mesh to create a curve along the edge of a particular feature or a defined path. Once you have this curve, you can then use a brush like the Curved Tubes brush to create a tube that follows that curve perfectly. This way, you could quickly and accurately create complex wires or cable layouts without having to manually draw every single detail. And the best part? These frames are not set in stone. You can modify them, combine them, or delete them as needed, making it a versatile tool to have in your arsenal when you're working on hard surface models. So Frame Mesh in ZBrush is a lifesaver when you're dealing with intricate hard surface designs. Select the rear polygroup and press Delete Hidden. It's time to start extruding those edges and moving the points into position. For the ZModeler brush, choose Slice Mesh for both point and edge actions. Press Uncrease All and then slide that point out just a tad. Do another slice and delete that extra edge. Now we can unmask those 3 points, and let's run another Polish by Features. Next, mask out those edges. Invert the mask and use the Gizmo to move them up a bit. Now we can alt tag these 10 faces for a quick transpose. Scale them flat and rotate them downwards. Let's unmask the edges and blur the mask. Give it a little rotation for a slight bend. Use the move brush for any adjustments. Now go ahead and press Ctrl W to group visible. Time to extrude those two edges. Unmask the edges and rotate them down with the gizmo. Next, grab the move brush and do some fine tuning. Unmask those edges and move them with the gizmo. For the point action, select Move and brush size for the target. Now we're back to extruding edges and repositioning the points. Next, we want to collapse those edges at the end. Unmask the edges and use the gizmo to rotate them down. Now we're going to want to spend a few minutes repositioning those points with the ZBrush. Alt tag the polys to polygroup them. Next, unmask the polygroup and run a polish by features. Let's make a few more adjustments with the move brush. Press Ctrl W to group visible. Now we can extrude the whole mesh border. From the ZBrush, choose Transpose Edge Loop Complete and move them downward. Then we can slide these edges up a bit. It's time to delete this edge loop to make it easier to bridge across. Unmask these edges and move them up. Now bridge these two edges over. Go ahead and add an edge loop right down the middle. Control click on the point to unmask the polygroup and scale it flush. Next, unmask the edges and use the move brush to move them down. Then we can run a polish by features before clearing the mask. Use the move brush for any cleanup work. Let's go ahead and grab the ZBrush and get those creases in order. Alt tag the interior faces to polygroup them. From the ZBrush, choose Inset for the polygon action, Polygroup Island for the target, and Standard for the modifier. Slide that outer edge loop out a bit. Then we can use the ZBrush to correct a few points. Go ahead and turn on Dynamic. Next, use a low intensity smoothing at the end. Let's head back to the front and do a bit of smoothing there too. Press Ctrl W to group visible. Next up, let's extrude all those polygons and then press Flip. Press Crease PG and turn Dynamic back on. Set the smooth subdivision to 4 and the crease level to 3. Go ahead and add an edge loop. And lower the crease level to 2. Slide the edge loop complete up a little. Add another edge loop toward the bottom. Pull up the gizmo and select Cylinders 3D from the gear. Then we can set the inner radius to 0.5. Now press Unify. Snap it to the side view and scale it in the Z-axis. Unmask the polys and extrude them with the gizmo. Use the Clip Curve brush to flatten the faces. Now we can unmask the bottom polys and weld them in the Y-axis. Then unmask the bottom faces and move them down with the gizmo. Weld them in the Y-axis again. Then we're going to want to turn on symmetry in the Y-axis. Q-mesh the poly loop and hold Shift to switch it to a move operation. Then throw in a single edge loop. Unmask the middle edge loops and scale it in the X-axis. Grab the Slice Curve brush and add an edge loop. Now we can weld it in the Y-axis. Unmask the edge loop and scale it inwards. Let's go ahead and slide the edge loop down a little. From the ZBrush, select Polygroup, Polyloop. Then switch it to Inset Polygroup All. Now we can Q-Mesh Polygroup All while holding Shift. Press Crease PG and turn on Dynamic. Hold Ctrl and move with the gizmo to duplicate.